I'm calling this meeting of the Charter Revision Commission meeting to order. Welcome committee members, staff, and audience to the meeting. The first item on the agenda will be the approval of minutes from October 14th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. As you recall from last time, we have several items of old business. The first one was Article 2, Section 202, the composition, eligibility, election, and terms, and it had to do with 202C, election and terms. I think at that one, Sue, you'd made a comment about the partial terms.
Yes, I was referring to current Councilor Karski that he had been appointed when Bob Litz moved to the county, and he had 1 year and then had to run the following year. And so when he finishes his term, his second term in 2016, he will have served 5 years rather than the usual 8 if you get 2 full terms.
Okay. So do we know of how other governmental jurisdictions handle partial terms?
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Aguilar, in terms of looking at this, we came up with a study of all our citizen boards and commissions not too long ago, and we had the City Council amend how many terms those board members could serve, and we modeled it after the 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that allows, if you have served less than 50% of a term, it doesn't count to your 2 consecutive full term limit. So like if a person became vice president and then became president for 2 years or less, they could then run for office again for 2 more terms. So we basically did that for board members and looking at certainly what other government entities, local governments have done, as you had requested last time. We are the lone city within South Dakota that I could find that has term limits. I looked at the, especially the charter cities like Brookings, Pierre, and Watertown. They have unlimited terms in terms of how long they can do that. We found in looking at the board issue that it's certainly, if you have a qualified board member, we'd like to keep them on the board. And the same type of situation as Councilor Karski, we had people filling an unfulfilled board seat. Someone would move away, and we had like a 6-month term that they fulfilled, and then they had only eligibility for 1 more. So we changed that through the City Council. So certainly that'd be something for your consideration, and if you do consider it, I would suggest the 22nd Amendment be kind of your guide in terms of the 50% or less.
But at the same time, this issue has been addressed on boards within the city. And so at this time, the city would be the one exception to how a partial term works.
Correct. Elected office, that's correct.
I like following the 22nd Amendment. I think that sounds like a fair.
Are there other comments on that?
I agree.
Okay. It would seem then that it may be appropriate that if we ask that some wording be generated, that we could consider again at another meeting, that would model the 22nd Amendment. Would that be a reasonable item? That
yes.
we could get some wording that would be there I think at this time we have 4 people who are in favor of the concept, and to come up with wording for that we could then carry forward to our list to see if it makes the ones that we would want to put on.
I will prepare that wording, Mr. Chairman, and we'll have it posted on SIRE in advance too, so the public can see the proposal as well, but it would mirror, the 22nd Amendment. We don't like to reinvent the wheel, so we'll just mirror that.
Is there any public input on this item?
Bruce Danielson, I personally believe it should be modeled after the 22nd Amendment. I wanted to make sure that if there is some help that can be done to make somebody like Councilman Karski feel whole in this. It's too late for him, but for anybody in the future to be able to do that. And then I know that there's a consideration that also should be given to the mayor's position also in case there's ever any issue that happens. Well, in case that doesn't come up during the mayoral discussion, but I hope that we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would it be okay if I were to just deviate from our agenda and go right into the mayor's item? And that was 302, where the wording, no mayor shall serve more than 2 full or partial terms consecutively, that we would propose similar language?
Mr. Chair, I would agree.
I agree.
I agree.
Agreed.
Okay, so you've got 2 duties assigned. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
And we'll look forward to that. Is there any public input on the mayor's?
Bruce Danielson. The only thing that I would say is, just as in the 22nd Amendment, that it doesn't apply to the current office holders. So that way we have to go through the full election cycle for that particular position, just like they did when they put the 22nd Amendment together. So having studied a lot of constitutional history and law in my school, I remember these discussions we used to have about the process. So thank you.
Thank you. So I think that the next item, and my apologies again for skipping, but I thought it made sense to put those 2 together. If we look at section 204, compensation and expenses, and on this one, we'd ask for the difference between the pension system and the employee's retirement system. And do we have any answer on that?
Doing an historical review of it, Mr. Chairman, it looks to me like they're just synonyms of the same item. In 2008, there was an amendment proposed by the commission to allow a mayor to elect to not participate in the city pension system, and I think they were just using pension system versus retirement system interchangeably. However, in looking over this article, this probably would be a worthy item for an amendment because we don't have a city pension system anymore. We're now part of the South Dakota retirement system. So I'll have a proposal next time with your blessing that would just eliminate the excluding the city pension system phrase out of that. And in 2008, where this, the genesis of it was that a mayor, if they chose to only do 1 term, they wouldn't vest in our city pension system because it was a 5-year vesting period. But now with the South Dakota retirement system, it's a 3-year vesting period, so it really doesn't apply anymore to any future mayors in terms of whether they would elect to participate. Whereas before, if they did 1 term under our city pension system, they would just get refunded their contributions. And in the attorney explanation on the ballot, it was pointed out that this would be a payroll savings because the city makes contributions to the pension system if a mayor was contributing to the pension system. So they thought it'd be a savings if a mayor came in and elected not to participate. So that was where that came about.
So the history on that had to do when there was a pension plan and not the retirement system that's in place today.
Right. We are now, as of July 1, 2013, any new employees are covered under the South Dakota retirement system. So our pension system is now frozen and doesn't allow any new members to come in, and so that was all part of the pension reform that was approved by the current members of the pension system a couple years ago.
Okay, but that would, well, as I read this, so that would just be a cleanup, and it wouldn't really change anything in substance, because it excludes the city pension system, but that's no longer in existence, and we'd still continue with the mayor may elect to participate in the employee's retirement system. So in substance, nothing would change, and so we would need to look at that it's a probably cleaning up language without changing substance.
Correct.
Any comments? My apologies for speaking too much. Is there any public input on this item? Okay, so it appears that this will appear, we may have some language coming up again, and to decide if we want to, if it's an item that we want to pursue. So, thank you. I think the next item is 211, procedure, and it has to do with the meetings. 2.11. And the wording, I think as it goes back as to when this was written and what the practice is today, that the council shall meet regularly at least once in every month at such times and places the council may describe by rule. If the council meets more than once a month, it may designate which meeting is the regular meeting. If they don't so designate one, the first meeting of the month is a regular meeting. And I think as it goes into other places, the only one that there is an attendance requirement for is the regular meeting and not for the other meetings. So, am I correct on that?
You are correct.
Okay. Any comments from any of the members? Is there any public input on this item? So I think at this point, I guess I got the clarification I need. I don't know if we need any more action on this one. So it can be resolved. The next one is Section 214, updating the Code of Ordinances. And it was updated in 72 and 92, and I think it was also in 2012, but we don't have that wording in there. Do we have any discussion on that as to what may be a way to address that?
Mr. Chairman, I think it was me at the last meeting who had proposed that we potentially update that to include 2012 and the revamp that was done that year. The comment that was made by the City Attorney's Office was simply the problem with making sure that along with a bunch of other updates to the charter, went through. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. If we have room or the opportunity, it might make sense, but otherwise, I don't think it's critical.
So would you be suggesting then that it could be a possible item, but we'll consider that in conjunction with other items that we may develop as well?
That will be my suggestion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we'll keep that on the list of possible items. Is there any public input on this item?
Bruce Danielson. I was wondering, why does it have to show in the charter the specific years, and why not just every 20 years starting, in this sequence, so that way we don't ever have to address it again. We just have to, every 20 years, automatically go through the process and just simplify it, and then voters don't have to vote on it every time it has to come up. It's just, based on the way the census is written into the Constitution, it just says every 10 years, and so it's just automatically done every 10 years. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we will have that as an item on the list that we'll consider as to which ones we want to recommend for changes. And again, my apologies for going from A1 to B back to A2, 3, 4. So, but now we'll go on to new business. The first item is Article 4, Departments, Offices, and Agencies. As we,
Mr. Chair, I have a question in Section A when it speaks about the mayor establishing city departments and how if they become effective after the expiration of 25 days, unless action is taken on the executive order by 6 or more members of the city council. I probably should remember this, but I don't recall how often executive orders are brought before the council. And if there's a change, is it immediately brought forward within that 25-day period, or I would just like an explanation.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. The Human Resources Department handles the executive orders, and there is, I believe, a bi-weekly list of any changes that are done or any new executive orders that are entered into by the mayor. So certainly it would be within that 25-day period. The council would be notified if there is a executive order creating a new department. And certainly they would hear about something as big as that. So,
Thank you.
okay, so that was under general provisions.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I do have something with Section B also.
Okay.
I would like us to investigate eliminating the 5% and changing it that all directors will be approved by the advice and consent of the council. If you note, it says the appointment by the mayor of any officer and or employee having final authority over more than 5%. And I would like to look at it specifically for the directors of the departments and approved that all directors would be approved by the advice of, and consent of the council. What I found as a city council member is that in many cases the director may not hold 5% of the budget, but they do hold a considerable and maybe sometimes more power and discretion than someone that may have a larger percentage of the budget. So I just like to have that as a topic of conversation for this group.
Okay, so would you see that, are you prepared for the discussion today, or would you see getting some research into that for the meeting next time?
Either way. Again, I gave my rationale. There may be some of the other the present council members that would like to speak to this, and maybe the city attorney could enlighten us on what the historic value of this is.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, there are 12 department directors, as there are 12 departments. if memory serves, I believe it's been 10 of the 12 that have been approved by advice and consent of the council, and then I think 2 of the departments fell under that less than 5% of the budget. And community development was one of the departments, and I think it was central services was the other. So that would be mostly the IT, the information technology function. So this, I believe the intent would be then to, instead of 10 of the 12, have all 12 be then approved by the council, would be the intent.
Mr. Chairman, I would just have a question for Mr. Fifley. Are there any other employees of the city who would qualify as controlling 5% or more of the budget besides department directors?
No, the other few appointments that are made by the mayor, Mr. Smith, there's a few dentists actually over at the community clinic that are appointed by the mayor. There are also a few assistant chiefs involved, especially with like police. The assistant chief is also appointed by the mayor. But for the most part, this would run the gamut of the appointments made.
Any other comments?
I would like a chance to research and investigate further. Maybe wait till the next meeting.
Okay, so it looks like both 401A and B we would have discussion at our next meeting. Okay. So we're 2 for 2 so far. 402 personnel system. .403 legal officer. 404 planning. Is there any public input on Article 4?
I just had a comment that I really like what Ms. Aguilar brought up on the council is a policymaking body. And when you have directors who receive substantial salaries and have substantial influence in the direction of TIFs and several other things that go on in the city, they have large salaries, they have a lot of influence. They should all be brought before the council, so the council as a policy-making body can help address the direction that each one of these people are involved in. So I wish to see all of the directors be approved by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public input? Then we'd move on to Article 5, financial procedures. Fiscal year. Submission of the budget and budget message. Budget message. Budget. City Council action on budget. Amendments after adoption. Lapse of appropriations. Administration of the budget. Overspending of appropriations prohibited. Capital program. City Council action on capital program. And public records. Does anyone see anything in there that they would like to discuss for change? Is there any public input on Article 5, financial procedures? Hearing none, we'll move on to Article 6, elections. City elections. Council districts, adjustment of districts. Initiative and referendum. Any items that people would like to discuss? Is there any public input on Article 6, elections?
Bruce Danielson again. My concern and what really got me involved in city government in the first place was how the elections are handled here in Sioux Falls. And I'd like to actually spend time with you laying out some ideas in the future. I won't waste a lot of time right now, but we ran into some issues with the advocational education sessions that were held that were against that were held under less than proper circumstances. The city is actually prohibited by state law and our charter from financing and controlling the elections as the only forum, as the 8 advocational sessions that were held for the 2014 election. And state law, the U.S. Constitution, state constitution are all very clear that they were handled inappropriately in the last election. And I would like that when the City of Sioux Falls has an election, that we actually follow our own charter and state law on these issues and not get involved in financing, such as in the indoor pool election where $46,000 was spent on the city building a reason and a video and a marketing campaign, and then having city employees go out and give the marketing campaign at all these meetings. The excuse was for doing this was, well, we did it for the event center. Well, the event center was actually a special election. It was a popularity poll, and it wasn't a constitutional election. And, you know, it was just a sense of the public. Whereas the city election was one of our guaranteed rights in our process, and the city, like in the state, aren't allowed to be involved in it. So I would like some clarity in that. Also, when we took the City of Sioux Falls to circuit court prior to the election last year, we talked about, we found out from the Secretary of State that in state law, that only thing that was supposed to be actually on the ballot is a very simple explanation of what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. The Secretary of State sat there and went very clearly in there, and that the long prose, the 280-word explanations highlighting companies, highlighting benefits of something that wasn't even on the ballot, should not have been on the ballot. Each one of the 4 issues were actually rewritten by the city attorney's office to match what the administration wished to put on the ballot. We would like to have it firmly put into the charter that only thing that's on the ballot for any kind of explanation is a simple explanation of what a yes vote means and what a no vote means, and nothing more. We worked very hard in those 4 ballot issues only to have the city marketing department change what we were trying to do. And I'd like to work some more with you on all of that. And thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. I would have a question for Mr. Fifley. Looking at Section 6.01, Subpart C, this grants to the City Council the governance over city elections and the setting of standards by ordinance. I would just ask what ordinances we currently have in place to govern the issues that were brought forth during the public input phase on Article 6. And I would assume, just from, I apologize I did not go study the ordinances that we currently have before asking this question, but I would assume that we do have some ordinances in place along those lines that would govern city involvement, municipal involvement in city elections. And I guess if more research is required for this question, that's fine, but would the City Attorney's Office, I guess, be satisfied with the power of the City Council to set down those ordinances and the need not to micromanage those issues in the Charter?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. First of all, we just had the council undergo a major revision to our election ordinances. Previously, in about 2007, the City Council adopted verbatim the state statutes on campaign finance under the state law. And a few weeks ago, the council agreed with eliminating all the verbatim ordinances that were verbatim from state law. It just, I think it eliminated about 14 different sections. The items that would touch upon that would be SDCL 12-27-20, I think is the one regarding, since I've cited it so much, I certainly know the site, but it allows a government entity in terms of the ability to educate and inform the electorate on an issue without going into advocacy. I don't want to go into a long explanation about what was brought out in the public input, but needless to say, those groups did complain to the South Dakota Secretary of State's office, to the Minnehaha County State's Attorney's Office, and also to the Attorney General's office. And needless to say, none of those election officials on a state level or the local level felt a need to do anything regarding the educational and informational sessions that were held. And Mr. Smith is probably well aware of the government speech doctrine as well, and certainly in terms of what government can do, it can certainly inform the electorate, and the voters are smart enough to know how they want to vote ultimately on an issue. At any rate, I think the circuit court action that the public input speaker talked about, it's interesting to note that Circuit Court Judge Sabers found that there was nothing inappropriately done by the city, and that was regarding the outdoor pool initiative, and the explanation done was simply explaining, do you want an outdoor pool at Spellerberg or not? There could be no possible allegation of advocacy from that explanation. In terms of how the city was doing its ballots, it used to place not only the title of the initiated measure, but it would also place as a courtesy to the petitioners exactly what their text was. And the issue in that court action was there was a typographical error where they said they wanted an outdoor pool at a certain budget and by a certain time. By the end of December of 2015, there was a typographical error that said December 15, 2015 instead of December 31st, 2015. The court found that wasn't material, and the voters could certainly express their intent, and the main issue was, do you want an outdoor pool, and what the cost was. So in terms of those election issues, I think the city is continuing to follow state law as required by the charter. In terms of the ballot explanations done, there is a SDCL site in Title IX that specifically requires that the city attorney or someone hired as a legal officer on behalf of a city to place a statement on the ballot explaining what it is. And what's interesting is that in 2004, there was a case against then Attorney General Larry Long, who's now the presiding judge of our circuit, regarding a removal, I believe, of the sales tax on food, I believe it was, if memory serves, and there was an allegation regarding whether the explanation was proper. After that case, the state legislature changed the state statute where, for our benefit in terms of understanding what the attorney explanation is to involve, it's supposed to explain in an objective, clear, and simple summary, educate the voters of the purpose and effect of the proposal. And the Supreme Court specifically said that the lawyer is granted discretion as to how to author the statement, and the court's function is limited, and the court specifically held that we merely determine if the attorney has complied with statutory obligations, and we do not sit as some type of literary editorial board. So I guess, Mr. Smith, to answer your question, we follow state law. Our last election cycle, 3 of the 4 explanations that I drafted under my statutory duty were challenged in court, and each time the court said that my explanations were appropriate. In fact, now Judge Long specifically said my explanation was logical and coherent and so forth, so I took that as a compliment, but certainly we do our best. The courts have repeatedly stated that as a legal officer, I mean, we have duties in terms of making sure that our explanation follows the state statute and the obligation. So we follow state law on a city basis.
But, because I guess as I read 603, that is one of our shorter sections.
Yes.
It says, well, the provisions of the law of the state of South Dakota will prevail. Okay. Mr. Smith, would you like that on the agenda for next meeting as well?
No, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I appreciate the opportunity to offer further comment. I would say that I think that this Article 6 is written fairly well. I think that our state law is pretty clear and operates well for campaign finance and governing of elections. Looks like our state law is cited in Section 6.03 for initiatives and referendum, and then under 6.02 the council has simply adopted state law for those purposes. So I would personally ask that not be considered and that Article 6 remain as is.
Okay. Thank you. So we've been through Articles 4, 5, and 6, as well as the old business from last time. And some of that we are moving forward again to the next meeting to address again as it percolates through. Is there any additional public input at this time?
Bruce Danielson. One of the things that was discussed in the recent change in the city elections was primarily involved with financing of the elections, and we didn't get involved very heavily in the discussion of how the election functions are handled. So there are some things that are done in ordinance and in the way that the council works, but it doesn't involve, it didn't touch what needs to be done in the charter. As part of those 4 election ballot issues, one of the problems we had in that whole issue and why it was such a struggle for us was, we were just a bunch of citizens. We didn't have unlimited funds like the city has to be able to go to any courtroom anywhere and do something. So we tried the best we could. We couldn't get attorneys. We worked with a lot of every way we could financially as we tried to try and get our point across that things were being done that didn't match the spirit of the charter and the spirit of the Constitution of the state of South Dakota and the way that the home rule charter system is set up. When we approached the state offices to discuss where we thought we talked to the Secretary of State's office, we went to the Attorney General's office, we went to legislators. We tried multiple different ways to find out what our rights were in this whole process. And because we were home rule charter, they didn't get involved. Now, if we would have been Hartford, if we'd have been just a regular body under the municipal rules of the state of South Dakota, we could have redressed our grievances to some of these offices. But because we were home rule charter, we couldn't go to these people for opinions and to work. And then nobody would touch it because everything came back as, we're home rule charter. You can't do anything. So I just want to explain that side of things from somebody who was deeply involved in those issues. We've also learned in this process, and this goes into some other areas, but that we've actually found out that through some work that I was trying to accomplish with some people, that in actuality, because we're home rule charter, we don't have the ability to just go to the state's attorney's office or to the attorney general's office when it comes to open meetings violations and open records violations. Because they send us back saying, well, your home rule charter, nobody's ever questioned it before, so we have to find some way to get some process in the charter for allowing for appeals in these situations. And if we can't do it here, then we have to do it in the legislature. And I'd rather not do it in the legislature because then that just takes away that many more rights from us here. But these are the things that have to be done. So we know that in 6.03 and the state law appear to be similar, but they're actually similar in written form, but they aren't followed in practice. And we've learned this the hard way through the hard work that a lot of people did in the last election. And as we study things more, we'd like to be able to somehow put in there, like with the special meeting that the council called, that I filed actually an open meetings violation. And the reason I filed that is because state law says specifically that if the charter or the ordinance in the city of Sioux Falls is more stringent, it must be followed. And that's the way state law is. And our charter actually is more stringent than state law on the open meetings rules. And we violated the spirit and the law in the way that special meeting several months ago in April was held, when for whatever reason they didn't post the agenda until it was absolutely had to be. And then we ended up having a special city council meeting at the regular time with the regular agenda in violation of that law. And these are the things that we constantly run into. And we'd like to see some way to make this follow the spirit. And I bring that up because we're looking at these issues that I've already brought up here on here, that we always find some other way to get away with things or get by with things. And, citizens are a little tired of it. So thank you.
Any other public input? Our next meeting is probably have to look back at my minutes. No, today's November 12th.
I mean December 9th.
Our next meeting will be December 9th. There being no further business, I hereby adjourn the meeting.